Welcome to Mythic Slumber, your sanctuary for adult sleep stories. Tonight, we return to Troy, not through the clash of shields, but through the quiet spaces where love lingers and fate moves softly. This is a story of beauty that warms a city, of a choice that cannot be undone, and of a long waiting filled with ordinary human moments. We will walk through golden streets at sunset, listen to distant waves, and sit beside fires while years circle gently overhead. If this story brings you comfort, take a peaceful moment to like and subscribe before settling in. Now let the world slow. Let the glow of ancient stone and candlelight hold you as we drift into love, fate, and the shadows they cast. Calm, poetic, and ready for rest. Troy is most beautiful at the hour when the sun begins to lower its voice. In the late afternoon, when the day has done its work and the air turns gentler, the city feels like it is wrapped in honeyed light. The high walls, those famous walls that seem to rise from the earth itself, do not look harsh or guarded in this warmth. They look protective. They hold the city the way a steady hand holds a candle against the wind. From a distance, the stone glows amber and rose, and the shadows along the towers stretch slowly, as if even darkness is unhurried here. Birds circle lazily above the parapets. Farther beyond, the sea rests like a sheet of polished metal, breathing in a calm rhythm that is almost too soft to notice until you listen for it. The harbour below the western slopes is quiet, not empty, simply settled. Boats sway gently. Ropes creak in small, sleepy sounds, and the water nudges the dock with a patient tap, tap, tap. Salt hangs in the air, mingling with warm stone and the faint sweetness of crushed herbs from nearby markets. The city is alive, but not frantic. It is alive the way a hearth is alive, glowing steadily, comforting rather than loud. As the sun tilts lower, the streets begin to soften. The heat trapped in the stone releases slowly, warming the air close to the ground. Sandals whisper across flagstones. Silk garments brush lightly against skin. Traders fold cloth over baskets. A potter rinses clay from his hands at a fountain where water runs cool and clear. Children move through alleys with quiet laughter that rises and falls like little waves, never sharp enough to break the calm. Up near the temples, incense begins to burn, and the scent threads through the city like a memory. Resin, cedar, something sweet and smoky. Priests move in unhurried lines. Their robes sway gently. Their footsteps are soft, careful, respectful. In the temple courtyards, columns catch the sunset and glow like warm ivory. The carved faces on stone reliefs look calmer in this light, their expressions less stern, more forgiving. And in the upper city, where homes grow larger and quieter, the evening begins its slow ritual. Lamps being lit one by one, doorways swept, water poured into basins, bread set to cool on cloth. Troy, at sunset, feels safe, not because it believes nothing can change, but because it has learned the art of appearing unshaken. A city that has stood through many seasons learns how to hold itself. It learns how to keep its breathing slow, and even when the world beyond its walls is unpredictable. There is a place near the palace where the stone steps are worn smooth by generations of feet. If you sit there in the fading light, you can feel the city's steadiness beneath you. The stone is warm through fabric. The air carries the last sweetness of the day. The horizon is a long shimmering line where sea meets sky, and the sky turns gradually from gold to pale pink to deepening blue. Some evenings, when the breeze comes in from the water, it carries distant sounds. A gull's call, the soft clink of rigging, the faint murmur of sailors speaking in low tones. But those sounds are never urgent. They are part of the city's lullaby. And this is the mood in which our story begins, not with shouting, not with clashing, but with a city at rest in its own beauty, unaware, yet also somehow, quietly aware, that beauty can be both a blessing and a cost. A gentle sea breeze moves through a broad avenue lined with cypress and stone. The leaves do not rustle loudly, they sigh. The light moves through them in soft patterns, painting the street with slow, shifting shapes. Along the walls of villas and small courtyards, vines creep upward, their leaves darkening as the sun lowers. On a balcony above, a scholar closes a scroll and ties it with a thin ribbon. He places it carefully in a wooden box as if knowledge itself is a fragile thing. Inside the room behind him, a lamp is lit. Its flame is small and steady. It throws warm light over shelves of clay tablets and rolled parchment. In that light, the room feels like a sanctuary of ancient wisdom, quiet study, calm order, the comfort of contained thought. In another part of the city, a woman folds a length of silk, smoothing it with her palms. The fabric catches the sunset and looks almost liquid. She sets it into a chest lined with cedar. The scent rises softly, and the small domestic ritual feels comforting, like preparing for sleep. Troy is full of these small, steady acts that say, "We are here, we continue, the world is held together by ordinary hands." As the sun nears the horizon, the walls become even more luminous. Guards stand on towers, but their posture is relaxed. Their attention is habitual, not anxious. They gaze outward over the plain, then back into the city where lamps are appearing like grounded stars. The palace, set higher, receives the last light with quiet grandeur. Its courtyards open to the sky. Its columns catch fire in gold. Its long corridors begin to cool, holding the day's warmth in the stone. Within those corridors there is movement, but it is measured. Servants carry trays of water. Footsteps glide over polished floors. Curtains shift gently in the breeze, their fabric whispering like distant waves. And then, somewhere near the palace's outer court, a subtle change moves through the atmosphere. Not a shout, not an announcement, a shift in attention. Heads turn slightly, conversations soften, even the air seems to pause, as if the city is listening for something it does not yet understand. A carriage has arrived, not with dramatic fanfare, but with quiet inevitability, like dusk arriving. The horse's hooves land softly on stone. The wheels make a low, steady sound. The people nearby do not rush forward. They simply watch, their faces calm but alert, as if sensing that something important has entered the city's story. The light is very golden now, almost molten. It wraps around the carriage, softening its edges, and from within, a figure steps down. Helen. Her presence does not feel like a spectacle. It feels like an extra layer of light, as if the sunset has decided to linger a little longer in one human form. Her hair catches the warm glow. Her garments, fine, flowing, move like water in slow motion. Even her stillness seems luminous. The people watching do not cheer. They do not shout her name. They simply fall quieter, as though beauty has its own gravity. Helen pauses for a moment with her hand on the carriage door, breathing in the air of this new place. The breeze brings sea salt and incense, warm stone and evening smoke. This scent is unfamiliar, but not unwelcome. It feels like stepping into a room that's already warm. She looks up at the walls, at the towers, at the city glowing under the last sun. Troy looks like it was built to be remembered. Her footsteps are soft as she begins to walk, not hurried, not uncertain. Her sandals touch the stone with a quiet tap, and the sound seems gentler in the golden light. A few attendants follow at a respectful distance, their silk garments whispering behind her. But Helen's attention remains forward, toward the inner courtyards, toward the palace, toward the quiet heart of this city. The sunset continues to deepen. The horizon shimmers. The sea turns darker blue. The first stars begin to appear above the walls, faint at first, then clearer as the sky cools. Helen moves through Troy's evening as if she belongs to it. As if she's always been meant to stand under these walls, under this sky, in this slow turning of light. And that is the first shadow, though it is still gentle, the awareness that something can feel destined even before you understand why. The city does not know what will come. Not yet. For now, Troy is golden. For now, Troy is warm stone and gentle breeze. For now, Troy is safe in the quiet hour between day and night, holding its breath in beauty, and Helen, stepping deeper into its glowing corridors, carries a calmness that feels almost like sleep, soft, inevitable, and full of unspoken meaning. If you're enjoying this slow, firelit beginning, take a peaceful moment to like the video. Then let your breathing stay slow, because next we'll follow Helen farther into Troy, where her presence begins to reshape the city's quiet rooms, one hush at a time. As the sun slips closer to the horizon, Troy begins to glow from within. The last daylight rests on rooftops and temple steps like a warm cloth, and the city responds the way a calm home responds to evening, by becoming softer. Lamps appear in doorways. Courtyards fill with low, golden pools of light. Curtains drift gently in the sea breeze, and the breeze carries the scent of salt and resin, of warm stone and faint incense smoke. Helen walks deeper into the palace grounds, and the city seems to adjust around her without anyone instructing it to. Not because she commands it, because presence can be its own kind of power. Her attendants keep a respectful distance. Their footsteps are careful, their voices lowered, as though they can feel that the atmosphere itself is delicate. The palace corridors, broad and pale, hold the day's warmth. The floor is smooth beneath sandals, and the sound of movement becomes a soft rhythm, tap, 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 fading quickly into hush. Helen's garments are light, layered and fluid. The fabric catches the sunset and shifts in subtle shades, gold, cream, faint rose, like sky reflected on water. When she moves, the silk whispers, not loudly, just enough to be noticed, a gentle sound that seems to belong to this hour. They pass a fountain where water trickles quietly into a stone basin. The water is cool and clear, and the sound is calm repetition. The courtyard around it is planted with herbs and low-flowering vines. Leaves release faint green fragrance as the wind moves through them. Helen pauses here, just for a moment, not because she is uncertain, because the quiet is inviting. Which as she looks at the water's surface and sees a faint reflection of herself, a softened outline blurred by ripples and twilight. The reflection is not sharp enough to scrutinize. It is only enough to remind her that she is here, in a place that feels both new and strangely familiar. A servant approaches with a small bowl of water for rinsing dust from hands. Helen dips her fingers into it, feeling the coolness spread across her skin. She lifts her hand and lets a few drops fall back into the bowl. Plip, plip, tiny sounds that disappear immediately. The palace seems built for that kind of vanishing, sounds arriving and then dissolving, thoughts rising and then settling. It is an architecture of calm, designed to keep everything gentle, Helen continues. And beyond the fountain, the corridor narrows slightly. It then opens again into a larger courtyard where the sunset pours in like liquid gold. Columns stand around the courtyard's edge, tall and pale, their surfaces catching the light so warmly that the stone looks almost alive. From here, the city's high walls are visible in the distance. They glow softly. The sea beyond them looks calm, a darkening sheet with a shimmering line where the horizon still holds a last trace of sun. Troy is a city of quiet grandeur, and Helen is moving through its heart as if she belongs in its stillest rooms. There is no shouting of names, no public display, only the subtle awareness among those nearby that something has entered Troy that cannot be fully explained by ordinary words. They reach a doorway draped with linen that hangs in long, clean folds. The linen moves slightly as the breeze passes, then becomes still again. Inside, the palace's interior light takes over, lamps and braziers glowing softly, turning the stone walls warm and honey-coloured. Helen steps in, and the temperature changes. The air is slightly cooler than the courtyard, shaded and steady. The scent of the palace is different too. Less salt, more cedar, more oil, more woven cloth and polished wood. A quiet hall stretches ahead, lined with low alcoves where small lamps rest. The lamps are evenly spaced, creating a rhythm of light and shadow, light and shadow. The rhythm is soothing. Helen's mind begins to drift into it. Light, shadow, light, shadow. She follows the corridor at an unhurried pace, and her attention begins to notice small details. The faint pattern carved into a door frame, the smoothness of stone worn by many hands, the way the palace seems to absorb sharpness and return only softness. Somewhere in the distance a stringed instrument is being tuned. The sound is faint, almost imagined. One quiet note, then silence, then another. A musician preparing for evening without hurry. Helen passes a side chamber where woven rugs cover the floor. The rug's patterns are intricate but muted in colour, designed not to demand attention. They soften footfalls even further. They make walking feel like gliding. In another chamber she glimpses a shelf of scrolls and carved tablets, records of trade, poems, treaties, stories. The sight of them gives the palace a dark, scholarly warmth, knowledge stored, voices preserved, time held in ink and clay. It feels like a place where words matter, and where silence matters too. Helen's escort leads her toward a quieter wing of the palace, away from ceremonial halls and toward private rooms. The corridors become calmer still. Fewer people pass. The lamps are dimmer. Shadows gather like velvet in corners. At the end of a hallway, a balcony doorway stands open. A breath of sea air enters through it, bringing coolness and the distant sound of water. Helen steps out onto the balcony and lets the breeze touch her face. The sky has shifted now. The sun is nearly gone. The last gold is concentrated along the horizon, while above it the blue deepens toward night. The first stars are clearer now, small steady points appearing one by one. From this balcony Troy looks peaceful. Roofs and courtyards below are dotted with lamplight. The streets are quieter. The city is settling into evening the way a body settles into sleep. Helen rests her hands on the balcony's stone rail. The stone holds warmth from the day and feels comforting under her palms. She breathes in, inhale, slow. She breathes out, exhale, slower. And in that long exhale, something inside her softens, because for the first time since arriving, she is alone with the city's silence, not the silence of loneliness, the silence of space, a silence that lets you stop holding yourself tight. She stands there, watching the horizon shimmer faintly as the last light fades, when she feels a presence before she hears footsteps. Not a sudden presence, a gentle one, a quiet shift in the air behind her. She turns her head slightly, not startled, and there, in the open doorway of the balcony, stands Paris. He does not enter dramatically. He does not announce himself. He simply stands, framed by warm interior lamplight, his figure soft-edged against the darker corridor behind him. Paris looks younger than the city's elders, but not careless. His face carries a thoughtful calm. His garments are fine, but not ostentatious. Layers of linen and a darker sash. Fabric that moves quietly when he shifts his weight. He pauses at the threshold as if he understands this is a moment that should not be rushed. Helen does not speak. Paris does not speak. The world does not demand speech from them. The breeze moves between them, cool and gentle, carrying the scent of sea and lamp oil, of stone warmed by sun and linen cooled by shade. Paris steps forward slowly. His sandals make almost no sound on the balcony stone. He stops at a respectful distance, not close enough to invade, close enough to be real. They look at each other, and something passes between them that is difficult to name. Not a sudden flame, not a dramatic shock, more like recognition, like seeing a familiar shape in a dream and realizing you have known it for a long time. Helen's expression remains composed, but her eyes soften slightly, as if the tension of travelling and arriving has loosened in one quiet instant. Paris's gaze holds steady. He looks at her not as a prize, not as a story, but as a person standing in twilight, breathing the same air. The city below continues its evening routine. A lamp is lit in a courtyard. A door closes softly. A distant voice calls someone home, then fades. Above, the stars continue appearing, patient and indifferent. The balcony becomes its own small world, a private space of quiet air and slow light. Paris lifts his hand slightly, not reaching for her, not touching, only a small gesture that suggests greeting without demands. Helen nods once, a tiny movement, barely visible, yet full of meaning. They stand together now, both facing the horizon, side by side but not pressed together, close enough to share the same view. The horizon shimmers, the last gold becomes a thin line, the sea darkens, the city's lamps glow brighter in contrast, making Troy look like it is holding a basket of small stars. Helen feels the warm stone beneath her hands. Paris feels the breeze on his face. Neither speaks, and in the absence of words the moment becomes even more powerful. Because words can argue, words can explain too much, but silence can simply be true. Paris shifts his stance slightly, and his sleeve brushes the stone rail with a soft fabric sound. Helen notices it the way you notice small sounds when the room is quiet. The quiet makes everything more vivid. The quiet makes everything intimate. The quiet makes time feel slower. They remain like this for a long moment, letting the evening deepen around them. It is not romance built from dramatic speeches. It is romance built from stillness, from presence, from the feeling that something has begun before either of them has chosen to name it. Below, Troy continues to breathe. Above, the sky continues to darken, and between Helen and Paris, in the gentle sea wind, a connection settles into place, unspoken, calm, and heavy with the strange certainty of fate. if you're enjoying this firelit calm, take a peaceful moment to subscribe and then keep drifting with us. Because next we'll step into Troy's gardens and quiet halls where love grows in whispers and the weight of choice begins to gather like distant clouds. Night arrives in Troy the way a blanket settles, slowly, gently, without any sharp edge. The last thin line of gold on the horizon fades to a pale memory, and the sea becomes a darker, calmer presence, breathing in long, steady cycles. Below the balcony, lamps glow in courtyards and along stairways, turning the city into a constellation of warm points held safely inside stone walls. Helen remains at the rail, her hands resting on sun-warmed stone that is now cooling, releasing its heat gradually into the night air. The breeze is softer than before, less salty, more balanced, sea and city together, carrying faint incense, the scent of oil in lamps, and the clean mineral smell of stone. Paris stands a short distance away, close enough that their quiet feels shared, far enough that the moment remains respectful, unpressured. They do not speak. And in this silence something becomes clear. The first glance was not a spark that flared and vanished. It was a door opening, not loudly, not dramatically. A door opening onto a room of calm recognition. Helen turns slightly, not away from the horizon, but enough that she can see Paris from the corner of her eye. In the lamplight from the doorway behind him, the edges of his face are softened. The light does not make him look heroic. It makes him look human, thoughtful, still, present. Paris shifts his weight, and the quiet fabric of his sleeve brushes the stone rail with a faint sound. The sound is small, but in the deep hush of the night it feels like a gentle signal. I am here. Helen lets her gaze settle on him more directly now, and Paris meets it. There is no sudden rush, no urgent movement, no scene that would be painted as betrayal in a loud retelling. Only the two of them, looking. Only the feeling that the air between them has become slightly heavier, as if the night itself is listening. Paris lowers his eyes for a moment, not in submission, but in thought, then looks back up. When he speaks, when the first words finally arrive, they are quiet enough that the night has to lean closer to hear. "Does the city feel strange to you?" he asks. His voice is warm, not theatrical, like the sound of a fire catching in a hearth. The tone holds no accusation, no expectation, only a simple question offered gently, the way you offer someone a cup of water after travel. Helen's reply comes after a pause, not because she cannot answer, because she is letting the answer be true. "It feels," she begins, then stops, noticing how the word feels matters more than any explanation. "It feels like it knows itself." Paris nods once, slowly. "Troy does," he says. "Sometimes I think it knows more than we do." The breeze moves, softening the silence again. Helen looks outward to the city lights and then back to Paris, as though their conversation is not only about place, but about something both of them can sense approaching, something not yet named. She says softly, "It is very calm." Paris's mouth lifts in a faint, almost sad smile. "Yes," he agrees, "it is calm." He does not add more, but the pause that follows carries meaning like weight in velvet. The calm feels precious precisely because it cannot be held forever. Like the last warmth in a stone wall at night, felt, appreciated, inevitably cooling. Paris steps closer, only a few slow steps, stopping again at a careful distance. He gestures to the far corner of the balcony where a small brazier sits, the coals glowing faintly under ash. Someone has tended it earlier. It offers warmth without flame, steady without drama. "May I?" he asks, and the question is not about the brazier alone. Helen inclines her head in a small nod. Paris kneels and stirs the coals gently with a thin metal rod. The sound is soft, a faint scrape, a tiny crackle. The coals brighten, revealing a deeper orange-red glow like a heart waking. A little warmth spreads into the air. Helen feels it on her hands, her wrists, her cheeks. The effect is immediate and comforting. The balcony becomes less like an open space and more like a room, an intimate room made of night, breeze and ember glow. Paris sits on a low stone bench near the brazier. He does not invite Helen with words. He simply sits and leaves space beside him, space that is not demanding, only offered. Helen watches him for a moment, measuring the quietness of his presence, and then she moves. Her steps are slow. Her garments whisper. She sits on the bench at a small distance, close enough that the warmth is shared, far enough that the choice remains hers. The brazier glows softly between them, its warmth steady, its light flickering faintly on their faces. Down below, the city continues to settle. You can almost hear the gentle closing of doors, the soft calls of family members, the low murmur of the last conversations finishing before sleep. Above them, the sky is deeper now, scattered with stars. Helen looks up briefly and finds a cluster of them, 3 bright points and a faint fourth, then lets her gaze drift back down, back to the warmth, back to the quiet company. Paris speaks again, and his voice remains low, as if he's afraid to break the spell of calm. "I used to come here when I was younger," he says, nodding toward the view, "when I wanted to feel small in a good way." Helen's eyes soften. "In a good way," she repeats quietly, savouring the phrase. Paris nods. "Yes, when the day felt too loud, too filled with expectations." He pauses, the ember light catching a thoughtful shadow under his eyes. "Up here, the city breathes slowly. It reminds you that you don't have to race time." Helen listens, and the listening feels like its own kind of closeness. Not the closeness of bodies touching, but the closeness of minds settling into the same rhythm, she says. "In my home, the air was always full of voices." Paris glances at her, attentive. "And here?" he asks. "Here," she says slowly. The silence has shape. Paris smiles faintly again, this time less sad. "That is Troy," he murmurs. "Stone and silence, warmth and distance." Helen's fingers rest on the edge of the bench, and she feels the coolness of the stone beneath the surface warmth. Cool and warm together, like 2 truths existing at once. As they sit there, their conversation slows. Words come less often, and when they do, they are simple. Nothing forced, nothing performed. A question about the sea, a quiet comment about the temples, a memory of a garden scent at dusk. Each exchange is small and gentle, like placing another piece of wood into a fire, not to make a blaze, but to keep a steady warmth. And gradually Helen begins to notice something deeper than the calm. She begins to feel the undercurrent, not fear, not dread, a weight, subtle but present, like the heaviness of storm clouds gathering far away over the sea, still out of sight, still silent, but changing the pressure in the air. Paris feels it too. His gaze sometimes drifts toward the dark horizon, as if he expects to see something there. But he does not speak of ships or consequences. Not yet. Because tonight is still gentle. Tonight is still the moment before the world rearranges itself, and perhaps both of them understand, without saying it, that moments like this are precious precisely because they are fragile. Helen shifts slightly on the bench, and the silk of her garment makes a soft sound. Paris's hand rests near the brazier, absorbing warmth. Their shadows stretch behind them, long and calm. It would be easy, in another kind of story, to turn this into a dramatic scene, to make the air crackle with fate and prophecy, to make the moment loud. But tonight, the story remains soft, because real turning points often begin in quiet. They begin in a shared breath. They begin in the gentle realization that a life has moved into a different shape. Paris speaks again, barely above a whisper. "Sometimes," he says, "I think the gods write our stories the way scribes write on scrolls, slowly, patiently, line after line." Helen looks at him, her expression unreadable, calm. "And do you think we are only ink?" she asks. Paris's eyes hold hers. He says, "I think we are hands too." The answer sits between them, warm and heavy. Hands that can choose, as hands that can touch, hands that can also let go. Helen's gaze drifts back to the city below. The lamps glow, the walls stand steady, the harbour sleeps. Troy looks eternal in lamplight. And yet, Helen feels something else beneath that image. The fragile truth that no city is invincible to the shadows cast by love and longing. She does not speak that thought aloud. She simply breathes. Inhale, slow. Exhale, slower. Paris mirrors the rhythm without realizing it. Their breathing begins to match, and in that matching there is comfort. Two bodies agreeing to be calm together, even if the world beyond them cannot remain calm. After a long silence, Paris rises, not abruptly, slowly, like someone leaving a warm hearth when the embers fade. He offers his hand, not reaching too far, not demanding, simply holding it open in the warm ember light. Oh, Helen looks at his hand. Then she places her fingers into it. The contact is brief, but unmistakably real. Warm skin, steady pressure, a quiet pulse of life. Paris helps her stand, and he releases her hand immediately, as if he respects the boundary even while acknowledging the connection. "The gardens are cooler," he says softly. "If you would like, we can walk." Helen nods. They move from the balcony into the corridor where the palace lamps glow in steady rows. Their footsteps are soft on stone. The corridor feels like a sanctuary of ancient wisdom. Quiet walls, warm light, the sense that history is written into every surface. As they walk, Helen notices how the palace changes at night. The day's brightness is gone, and the building feels more intimate, more secretive. Shadows gather under arches. The scent of oil and cedar grows stronger. Somewhere, a brazier crackles, sending warmth into the air like a slow sigh. They pass a doorway where a scribe's room is visible. Scrolls tied with ribbon, wax seals, a reed pen resting on a table. The image feels symbolic. Stories captured, choices recorded, history preparing itself to be remembered. Helen's heart remains calm, but not empty. It holds the quiet warmth of the balcony embers. It holds the weight of Paris's words. It holds the unspoken understanding that this connection is not a fleeting thought. It is a shadow that will stretch far. But for now, they walk slowly, two figures moving through warm lamplight, the palace silent around them, the city sleeping beneath its golden walls, and the night, gentle and deep, guiding them toward the gardens where love will grow in quiet corners, while fate gathers patiently beyond the horizon. The palace gardens at night are a different kind of world. In daylight, gardens are places of colour and motion, leaves flashing in sun, petals turning their faces toward warmth. But at night everything becomes quieter, slower, more inward. The greens deepen into near black. The pale flowers become gentle shapes rather than bright declarations, and the air cools enough to feel like a clean sheet laid over the skin. Helen and Paris step out from the lamplit corridor into the garden's open hush. A path of smooth stone leads between low hedges and small trees. The stones still hold a little warmth from the day, but the warmth is fading. The breeze moves softly through branches, and the leaves answer with a faint rustle, like dry scrolls shifting in a quiet room. Somewhere nearby, a fountain continues its slow work. Water falls into a shallow basin with a quiet, steady sound, soft enough that you might not notice it at first, and then, once you do notice it, you cannot stop hearing it. It becomes part of the night's rhythm. Helen walks beside Paris without touching him, and yet the space between them feels filled with the memory of the balcony embers, filled with words spoken slowly, carefully, filled with the awareness that this is not ordinary companionship. The air smells faintly of crushed herbs, mint perhaps, or rosemary, mixed with the sweetness of blossoms that open more fully at night. The scent is subtle and calming. It makes the mind drift, the way certain smells can pull you into a memory you didn't know you were carrying. Paris keeps his voice low, as if he does not want to startle the garden. "This path goes toward the older courtyard," he says, nodding ahead. "It stays cooler there." Helen nods and follows. Their footsteps on stone are soft, tap, 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 then quieter as the stones become slightly damp with night air. The path bends gently, never sharply, guiding them like a slow thought. Along the edges, small lamps sit in shallow niches, each one a small flame sheltered behind thin stone. The flames do not flicker wildly. They move like breathing. Helen notices the lamps are placed at equal distances, order and calm built into the night. She counts them without meaning to. 1, 2, 3, 4. The counting relaxes her, as if her mind is settling into a familiar rhythm. Step, light, step, light. They pass beneath an arbour where vines hang down in shadowed strands. The leaves brush lightly against Helen's shoulder as she walks, and the touch is so gentle it feels like the garden acknowledging her presence. Paris glances toward her, attentive but quiet. "Are you cold?" he asks. Helen considers the question honestly. The air is cooler than the palace, but it isn't unpleasant. "No," she says. "It feels clear." Paris nods, as if he understands. "Night air does that," he murmurs. "It makes everything simpler." They reach the older courtyard. Here the stone is darker, and the plants are arranged with more restraint. A row of cypress trees stands like tall, silent guardians. A shallow pool lies in the centre, its surface still as polished metal. The stars above are reflected in it faintly, as if the sky has been poured into stone. Helen pauses at the pool's edge. She looks down and sees herself, only an outline softened by darkness and water. The reflection is not sharp enough to judge. It is gentle, like a dream version of the self. Paris stops beside her, leaving space. They stand there together, looking down into still water, and for a moment the world feels entirely quiet. Even Troy beyond the walls feels far away, as if the city's noise has been wrapped in cloth and placed in another room. Helen speaks softly, almost to the water. "I don't know what I'm supposed to be here." Paris's answer comes after a pause, careful. "You don't have to decide tonight," he says. "Tonight can just be tonight." The simplicity of the words feels like a gift, a permission. Helen breathes in slowly. Inhale. Slow. Exhale. slower. The coolness of the air settles into her chest and makes her thoughts softer. They begin walking again, circling the courtyard. The path here is lined with low stone benches. One bench sits beneath a tree that holds a few pale blossoms, petals faintly visible in the dim light. Paris gestures toward it. They sit. The stone is cool beneath them, and the coolness is grounding. The tree above shifts gently in the breeze, and one petal falls, drifting down without sound. Helen watches it fall. The movement is slow, almost hypnotic. It lands near her foot, a pale shape against dark stone. It reminds her of something important. Beauty does not have to be loud to be powerful. Paris speaks again, and the tone of his voice is steady, calm. People will talk, he says, not accusing, not warning harshly, simply stating what is true. They already do. Helen turns her head slightly. About me? Paris's faint smile returns, but it's tired around the edges. About everything, he answers. About the wind direction, about whether the olives will ripen early, about which elder is displeased with which merchant. He looks down at his hands for a moment. And yes, about you. Helen's posture remains composed, but a small tension tightens in her shoulders. It is the instinct of someone who knows how stories can be twisted. Paris notices and softens his tone further. Not all of it is cruel, he says. Some of it is just people trying to place something they don't understand. Helen looks back toward the pool, toward the dark water holding a faint sky. And do you understand? She asks. Paris does not answer immediately. That pause is important. It is the pause where honesty lives. Finally he says, I understand that when you walked into Troy, the light changed. Helen exhales, and the exhale feels heavier than before. That isn't understanding, she says quietly. That is noticing. Paris nods, accepting the correction. Then, I understand that I want to keep noticing, he replies. The words land softly, but they carry weight. Not the weight of a dramatic vow. The weight of inevitability. The weight of something that feels simple and impossible at the same time. Helen looks at him, really looks, and sees that he is not trying to trap her in romance. He is not performing. There is a tenderness in him, yes, but also a shadow of knowing that tenderness does not protect you from consequence. In the distance, beyond the courtyard walls, a faint sound rises and fades. A guard calling a quiet signal, perhaps, or the low murmur of watch changing at the gates. Troy is still safe, but Troy is also watchful. Helen senses it now more clearly, the way the palace holds its breath in subtle ways, the way people look outward more often than they used to, the way conversations become hushed when someone approaches. The world is rearranging itself around this love, not suddenly, gradually, like furniture moved quietly in a room while the occupants pretend not to notice. Paris speaks again, even softer. The sea has been busy, he says, as if offering the truth gently like a cloak. Sailors talk, traders talk. Some say Greek ships have been seen, farther out. Helen's heart does not race. It simply becomes heavier, a quiet heaviness, like a heavy stone being placed on a table. Are they coming? She asks. Paris looks up at the branches above, as though searching the dark leaves for an answer written there. They may, he says, or they may only threaten for a while. Sometimes the world moves slowly even when everyone thinks it will move fast. Helen's gaze drifts toward the shadowed edge of the courtyard. So we are already being watched, she murmurs. Paris does not deny it. Yes, he says, but not by eyes alone. Helen understands him. He means fate. He means story. He means the way certain choices once made cannot be unmade without leaving marks. Helen's fingers rest on the cool stone bench. She feels the cold seep into her skin and steadies herself with it. "I didn't come here to start a war," she says softly. Paris's response is immediate, sincere. "I know." The simplicity of those words is almost painful, because knowing does not change what may happen. Knowing does not erase the shadow that love can cast. They sit for a while longer in silence. The fountain continues its gentle sound. The air remains cool and clear. The tree above them sways slightly. Helen's mind drifts through images. Troy's golden walls, the harbour at dusk, the balcony embers, the line of lamps in the garden path. She feels the tenderness between her and Paris, and she feels the pressure at the edges of that tenderness, the world gathering itself slowly around the story it believes is forming. Paris shifts slightly on the bench, and his sleeve brushes Helen's cloak just barely. Fabric touching fabric, a soft whisper of contact. He does not turn it into a gesture. He lets it remain small. Helen does not pull away. She simply breathes. Inhale. Slow. Exhale. Slower. And in that slow breathing, she finds the shape of acceptance. Not acceptance of tragedy, not yet, but acceptance that love, once recognized, does not ask permission from comfort. It arrives. It settles. It rearranges everything. Paris stands at last, unhurried, and offers Helen his hand again. Not insistently, not urgently. She takes it. The warmth of his hand contrasts with the cool night air, and the contrast feels soothing. Warmth and coolness, fire and stone, tenderness and shadow. They begin walking back through the gardens toward the palace corridors, the lamps appearing again in their steady sequence. 1, 2, 3, 4. The gentle rhythm guiding them like a lullaby. Behind them the still pool holds the stars. Ahead of them the palace holds its quiet rooms, and beyond all of it, unseen and distant, even the sea holds its dark shapes. Sails that may or may not be there yet, rumours that may or may not become real, fate that continues approaching at its own patient pace. For now, Helen and Paris walk slowly, two hearts moving through a calm garden, a love growing in whispers, and a city beginning, just beginning to feel the weight of what cannot be undone. The palace changes when news begins to gather. It does not change dramatically, not in a way you could point to and say, "There, that is the moment everything shifted." It changes the way a room changes when a storm is coming. The air pressure becomes heavier, voices lower without being told, and even the lamps seem to burn more carefully, as if light itself is trying not to waste warmth. Helen and Paris return from the gardens along the same stone path, passing the small lamps set at even intervals. Their flames remain steady, sheltered in shallow niches, each one a soft point of gold against dark leaves. 1, 2, 3, 4. The counting rhythm is soothing, like a slow heartbeat in the night. But when they step back into the corridor feels different than it did earlier. Not colder, more attentive. The palace seems to be listening with them. Somewhere ahead, a quiet conversation stops as footsteps approach. A servant carrying a folded cloth turns slightly and lowers his gaze, as if trying to become invisible. Two guards at an archway straighten their posture and exchange a glance that lasts a fraction too long. Helen notices, and she does not ask yet. Paris notices too, and his jaw tightens briefly before he softens again, as if he's trying to keep the evening gentle for her, even while something else presses at the edges. They walk slowly, their footsteps soft on the rugs that line this section of hall. The rugs absorb sound, the walls absorb sound. The palace is built to keep loudness out, and yet the feeling of loudness can still arrive. It arrives as tension, as unspoken knowledge, as the way the air holds itself. At the end of the corridor, a doorway opens into a smaller hall where a brazier burns brighter, warming the stone. The fire is not roaring, it is steady. Orange coals, a faint crackle, the comforting sound of heat doing its quiet work. A few elders sit near the brazier in a semicircle of chairs, their robes dark and heavy, the fabric catching firelight in soft highlights. Their faces are calm in expression, but their eyes are sharp. When Helen enters, the room quiets further, not with hostility, with the sudden silence that comes when a story walks into a room. Paris pauses at the threshold, as if measuring whether to bring her fully into this conversation. Then he steps forward and Helen follows, her movements slow, composed. An older man with a silvered beard inclines his head politely. Another elder nods once. Their greetings are minimal, respectful, careful. Helen feels their attention like weight, not judgment exactly, more like calculation, as if they are trying to understand how one person can change the shape of an entire city's future. Paris moves closer to the brazier and warms his hands briefly, then speaks in a low voice that keeps the room calm. "What have you heard?" he asks. The elder with the silver beard looks at the fire for a moment, watching the coals pulse and settle. Then he answers quietly, as though he is speaking in a sacred archive. "Merchant ships came in at dusk," he says, "from the south. They brought olive oil and stories." Helen's breath remains steady. She keeps her face soft and neutral. Another elder adds, "Sailors talk too, they always talk. But tonight their talking sounded more certain." Paris does not rush them. He lets silence stretch between sentences, the way you let a pause settle after a difficult truth so it can be held gently. "What kind of certain?" he asks. The silver-bearded elder rubs his thumb along the rim of his cup, a small repetitive motion, soothing even in its seriousness. "They say Greek ships have been seen again," he replies. "Not close enough for an alarm, but close enough to be remembered." Helen's gaze drifts to the brazier. The coals glow. The warmth spreads. The fire feels comforting, cozy, ordinary. Yet it sits in a room where fate is being discussed in whispers. The contrast is strange and human. Another elder, younger than the others but still older than Paris, speaks with a tired calm. "Some say they're only watching," he says. "Some say they are gathering. Either way, eyes are on the water." Helen does not flinch. She simply feels something settle lower in her chest, like a stone placed gently on cloth. Paris looks toward Helen briefly, his expression softening as if to remind her she's not alone in this room, even if she feels the weight of it. Then he turns back to the elders. "And what does my father say?" he asks. The elders exchange glances again. Quiet, practiced glances that say many things without words. "The king listens," the silver-bearded elder says carefully. He remains steady, he does not rush. He is weighing. Weighing. The word sits in the air like fog. Helen understands the word immediately. It means this: the city is beginning to measure cost, not in gold, in lives, in years, in what might have to be endured. Paris nods slowly, as if he expected this. The firelight draws a soft shadow across his face, making him look older for a moment. "Rumours can be managed," he says quietly. "Yes," the elder agrees, "until they become ships." Silence. A long, warm silence filled with the soft crackle of coals. Helen can hear her own breathing. Inhale. Slow. Exhale. Slower. She feels the room's attention settle on her again, and she speaks, not to defend herself, not to plead, only to be honest. "I didn't come to Troy to bring suffering," she says softly. The silver-bearded elder looks at her, and his eyes are not cruel. They are thoughtful, heavy with the long memory of politics. "Few people do," he says. "Suffering often arrives as a shadow behind beauty." Helen's throat tightens slightly at that, but she keeps her composure. She nods once. Paris's hand lifts as if to touch her shoulder, then stops, choosing restraint. He simply lets his presence be her support, a quiet wall beside her. The younger elder speaks again, voice low. "There are also messengers," he says, "whispers of letters, of demands. Menelaus may not accept this quietly." The name is not spoken harshly. It is spoken as a fact, a weight. Helen's gaze drops to the floor for a brief moment. She sees the rug pattern there, interlocking lines, repeated shapes. Order beneath tension. The pattern feels like something to hold on to. Then she looks up again. "The world was already arranged before I moved," she says quietly, more to herself than anyone. The silver-bearded elder nods slightly. "Yes," he answers, and now it rearranges again. Paris's voice is gentle but firm. "Do not speak of her as if she's a storm," he says. The elders do not argue. They're too wise for drama. They simply accept his tone and continue with calm gravity. "No," the elder replies. "She's not the storm. She's the sign that the weather has changed." The brazier crackles softly. A servant moves silently in the background, refilling cups, adjusting a folded cloth on a table. The ordinary motions of hospitality continue even as fate presses closer. That is how humans endure, by doing small, normal things while larger things gather beyond the walls. After a while, Paris and Helen leave the elder hall. Their steps are slow. The palace corridor seems longer now, filled with pockets of quiet where thoughts can grow heavy. They reach a balcony overlooking an inner courtyard. Below, the courtyard is lit by a few lamps, and the light pools on stone in soft circles. A small tree stands there, its branches barely moving, as if even leaves are trying to be still. Paris rests his hands on the balcony rail. Helen stands beside him. For a long moment neither speaks. The city beyond is calm. The sea wind is gentle. The stars are steady. And yet Helen feels the difference now in the atmosphere. Troy is still safe, but the safety has become something the city is choosing to believe in, rather than something it can simply assume. Paris finally speaks, his voice barely above a whisper. "I wanted your first days here to be quiet," he says. Helen turns her head slightly to look at him. "They still are quiet," she replies. "That is what makes it harder." Paris's breath leaves him slowly as if he's been holding it. "Yes," he says. "Quiet makes you hear everything." Helen looks out toward where the sea would be, beyond roofs and walls and distance. She cannot see the ships if ships are there. She can only imagine them, dark shapes against darker water, waiting like unsent messages. "They will come," she says softly, not as prophecy, but as acceptance. Paris does not deny it. He only nods once, the smallest movement. "And when they come," he answers, "we will still be human. We will still eat bread. We will still light lamps. We will still speak softly in halls, even if the world outside grows loud. Helen's eyes soften. There is comfort in that stubborn normality, comfort in the idea that even long storms are lived one day at a time. The wind shifts. A distant gull calls once, then silence. Helen's voice is quiet, like a page turned carefully. Was it ever possible to undo it? She asks. Paris looks at her, and his expression is tender, sad, steady. No, he says simply. I think the moment we saw each other, something already moved. They stand together in the balcony hush, letting that truth settle, not a dramatic vow, a gentle, heavy acknowledgement. Love, once recognised, becomes part of fate's machinery. Not because the gods are cruel, but because humans are human, because pride, desire and story are always waiting for a spark. Down below a lamp is extinguished. Another remains lit. The courtyard dims slightly, and the palace, warm and quiet, continues to hold them, two figures standing in soft night air. While somewhere beyond Troy's walls the world gathers itself slowly like clouds forming far out at sea. The way a heavy cloak settles over sleeping shoulders, not with a slam, not with any sharp conclusion, just with a gradual quieting, a soft return to stillness. Lamps burn lower, corridors empty, the last footsteps fade into distant rooms. Even the air seems to change texture, becoming thicker, calmer, more contained. Helen and Paris move through a passageway lined with carved stone panels, their patterns repeating like a scholar's careful handwriting. The designs are not meant to impress, they are meant to soothe. Leaf shapes, spirals, simple borders that guide the eyes and slow the mind. They do not speak as they walk. The silence between them is no longer awkward or new. It has become familiar, an inhabited silence like the warm space between two people who do not need to fill every moment with words. A servant leads them to a smaller chamber away from the central halls, the doorways draped with heavy fabric that hangs straight and still, absorbing sound. When it parts, the room beyond feels warmer, not because the night has softened, but because fire lives here. A hearth glows at the far wall, not roaring, steady. Orange coals and a low flame that lifts and folds back on itself. The light is gentle and firelit, painting warm gold across dark stone and turning shadows into soft, moving shapes. The chamber is quiet and comfortable in a way that feels almost modern, almost familiar, like a room made for slow storytelling. A few chairs sit near the hearth, their cushions dark and inviting. A low table holds a bowl of figs and a cup of water that catches firelight like a small amber jewel. On one wall, these shelves hold scrolls and tablets, records, poems, old treaties, stacked in careful order. It gives the room a dark academic warmth, as if knowledge itself is resting by the fire, listening. Helen steps inside and feels her shoulders loosen. This kind of warmth does something to the body. It makes you aware of how tense you've been without noticing. It encourages you to exhale longer than usual, as though the room has given you permission. Paris waits for her to choose a seat first. Helen sits in a chair angled slightly toward the hearth, close enough to feel the heat on her hands. Paris sits nearby, not opposite her like an interrogator, but beside her like a companion. A moment passes. The only sound is the soft crackle of coal settling. The fire is a gentle metronome. Tap, crackle, hush. Tap, crackle, hush. Helen watches the flame for a while, letting it hypnotize her. The firelight moves in slow waves, and her thoughts begin to drift with it, smoothing their sharp edges. When she finally speaks, her voice is quiet, shaped by the room. "Do you ever feel," she begins, then pauses, "like the story is already written somewhere, and we're only finding our lines?" Paris's gaze remains on the hearth, as if the answer might be in the flame's slow movements. "Yes," he says softly, "often." Helen's fingers rest on the chair's arm warmed by the fire. Her hands are calm, but her mind holds the weight of the Elder Hall, the murmured word ships, the feeling of the city's air changing. She says, "I thought I knew what my life would be." Paris looks at her now, attentive, steady. "And now?" Helen's answer is honest enough to feel like a confession, but calm enough to feel like acceptance. "Now," she says, "I feel like I'm standing in a doorway." Paris nods once slowly. "A doorway," he repeats, as if tasting the truth of it. Helen lets her gaze return to the flame. The fire makes shadows dance along the stone, and she imagines those shadows as long, thin shapes stretching across Troy's walls, across the harbour, across the sea. She speaks again, softer. "I didn't come here to be adored," she says, "and I didn't come here to be blamed. I came because something pulled." Paris does not deny it. He says, "I felt that pull too." A long pause follows, and in that pause the room feels like a sanctuary. Warmth, shadow, calm. The world outside might be rearranging itself, but inside this chamber the fire continues its steady breathing. Helen turns her head slightly. She's watching Paris's face in the firelight. "People will make it sound like a choice we made in a single moment," she says, "like a sudden fever." Paris's expression is tender, but there's a quiet seriousness beneath it. "It wasn't sudden," he answers. "It was a slow recognition." Helen's eyes soften. That is exactly it. Slow recognition. Not drama. Not an impulsive leap. A gradual truth arriving, the way night arrives, the way sleep arrives, inevitable once it begins. Helen's voice drops even lower, as if she does not want the walls to carry it. "Does that make it worse?" she asks. "That it was quiet?" Paris's breath leaves him slowly. "No," he says, "it makes it real." The words land like something placed gently into Helen's hands. Not comfort exactly, more like clarity. Real. Because real things cannot be undone by pretending they never happened. Helen looks down at her lap where the firelight paints her hands gold. She thinks of how cities operate, how pride hardens, how agreements break, how names become symbols, and she realizes that even if she wanted to reverse time, time would not cooperate. The world has already noticed. The world has already begun speaking. She says quietly, "If the ships come?" Paris does not interrupt. He lets her finish. "If they come," she continues, "people will demand a story with shadows and light. They will want to assign a single cause." Paris's jaw tightens for a moment, and then he relaxes again. "Yes," he says, "they will." Helen's gaze returns to the shelves of scrolls and tablets. "Then it will be written," she whispers, "in ink and clay, in songs, in speeches, in arguments, and none of it will be the whole truth." Paris follows her gaze, and the room's scholarly quiet becomes meaningful. Records and history. The long human habit of turning complex lives into simple narratives. He says softly, "The whole truth is rarely convenient." Helen's mouth lifts in the faintest smile, sad, understanding. "That is what frightens me," she admits. "Not the ships, not even the long waiting if it comes, but the simplification." Paris's eyes remain steady. "Then we won't simplify," he says. "Not here." The hearth crackles. A coal shifts, glowing brighter, then settling again. Helen feels the warmth on her palms and imagines it as something she can hold on to when the world outside grows colder. She says, "Do you regret it?" The question is simple, but it carries a weight that could crush a weaker moment. Paris does not answer quickly. He lets the fire speak for a while, and his silence is not avoidance, it is respect. Finally he says, "I regret the pain it may bring to others." Helen nods slowly. That makes sense. "And your heart?" she asks, voice almost a whisper. Paris looks at her fully now, and the firelight reveals something raw but controlled in his expression, an honesty that refuses to become dramatic. "My heart," he says, "does not regret recognizing you." Helen's throat tightens slightly, and she breathes slowly to keep herself calm. Inhale, slow. Exhale, slower. She says, "Then what do we do with this?" Paris's answer comes gently. "We live," he says, "one quiet day at a time, one lamp, one loaf of bread, one walk through the gardens, one moment by the fire." Helen hears the stubborn tenderness in that list, the resilience, the insistence that even if history becomes loud, life is still lived in small, ordinary acts. She lets her head lean back against the chair, feeling the warmth soften her thoughts. Outside, the palace remains still, but not empty. Somewhere in the distance, a guard's footsteps move along a corridor. A door closes softly. A voice murmurs and fades. Troy continues its nightly rhythm, even as clouds gather far away over the sea. Helen's eyes drift half-closed for a moment, not from sleep, but from the soothing pull of firelight. Then she opens them again. "I think," she says quietly, "the hardest part is that I can already feel the future pressing in." Paris nods. "Yes," he replies. "Fate approaches like fog. You don't see it at first. You just notice that the air feels heavier." Helen turns her gaze toward the hearth again. "I don't want Troy to suffer," she says. Paris's voice is steady. "Neither do I." They sit in silence. The fire continues. Warmth, shadow, calm. And then Helen says something that feels like the core of the myth, spoken softly enough that it becomes a lullaby rather than a declaration. "Even if I walked away," she says, "the shadow would still be here." Paris looks at her, and in his eyes is acceptance, not despair. "Yes," he says, "because it isn't only about where you stand. It's about what has already been seen. Seen by the city, seen by the elders, seen by the sailors, seen by the distant watchers across the water, and perhaps, in the old way of thinking, seen by the gods themselves." Helen's shoulders drop with a kind of reluctant relief. Not relief that the future is safe, but relief that she can stop pretending control is possible. And control is not the point. The point is how you hold yourself inside what comes. The firelight continues to wash the room in warm gold. The shelves of scrolls and tablets remain silent witnesses. The chamber feels like an island of calm inside a story that will one day become storm. Helen's breathing slows again, matching the coal's quiet pulse. Inhale, slow. Exhale, slower. And as the hour deepens, the choice that cannot be undone settles into place. Not as guilt, not as pride, but as the simple recognition that love has entered the world and the world has noticed. And so, time begins to stretch. Days will repeat, seasons will circle, and the long years, 10 years of distant thunder, will become a steady rhythm of ordinary life continuing beneath watchful skies. Morning returns to Troy the same way it always does, slowly, softly, with a light that climbs the stone as if it is learning the shape of the city by touch. At first, there is only a pale brightness along the eastern edge of the sky. Then the brightness becomes colour, and the colour becomes warmth, and the warmth begins to pull people out of sleep. Doors open, sandals meet stone, water is poured into basins, bread is lifted from ovens and set to cool beneath cloth. The city wakes, not with a shout, but with a steady, familiar rhythm. And beyond the walls, always beyond the walls, there are shapes on the sea, ships. Not always close enough to count, not always near enough to frighten in the way sudden danger frightens. Often they are only dark marks against darker water, as if the horizon itself has grown heavier. But their presence remains, day after day, like distant thunder that never quite arrives overhead. In Troy, the war does not begin as a single dramatic moment. It begins as routine, as repetition, as the slow realization that the world outside has decided to wait you out. The first year feels sharp. Every rumour is loud. Every sighting makes the chest tighten. Every shadow on the water seems like it might be the one that finally moves in. Guards rotate more often. Watchmen stare into the distance until their eyes ache. Elders speak in hushed circles, voices pressed down like coals under ash. But then the second year arrives, and the third. And somewhere along the way the sharpness begins to soften, not because the danger is gone, but because the human body cannot remain tense forever. It must learn to live inside the tension, the way it learns to sleep in a house where the wind always knocks softly at the shutters, so Troy adapts. The walls are inspected each morning as naturally as a household checks its roof after rain. Stone is repaired, cracks are filled, wooden braces are replaced. Men carry tools to the ramparts with the calm determination of people who have accepted their job will not end quickly. Tap of hammer, scrape of stone, a murmur of voices, then silence again. The sounds are not violent. They are practical, almost soothing in their repetition, work that has become a rhythm. In the harbour, boats still sway, though fewer venture far. Nets are mended on docks. Rope is coiled. Fishermen speak more quietly now, eyes drifting toward the distant water as if watching is part of breathing. At the market, traders still arrive at dawn, arranging baskets in rows that comfort the eye. Figs in neat piles, olives in dark bowls, grain measured carefully into sacks. Hands move as they always have. Coins still clink softly. A woman still chooses the roundest loaf. A child still tugs at a parent's sleeve for honey. Life continues, because life must. As months pass, the war becomes something like weather. Always present, always discussed, rarely seen directly. It is a low-pressure system that changes the air without always changing the sky. Some afternoons, a distant drumbeat is heard from the hills where Greek camps sit. Not loud, not constant. Just a slow, steady thump that carries faintly on the wind. Thump, thump, thump. It is the sound of the outside world reminding Troy it has not forgotten, and Troy answers, not with shouting but with routine. In the evenings, and torches are lit along the walls, their flames forming a warm necklace of light around the city. Watchfires appear on distant hills too, mirroring the torches like a second constellation. Two sets of lights facing one another across dark land. One set inside, one set outside. A quiet standoff measured in flame. In the palace, Helen moves through days that repeat and repeat, each one carrying the same mixture of ordinary softness and hidden weight. She learns the sound of Troy's mornings, the early footfalls in corridors, the faint splash of water, the distant call of a guard changing watch. She learns the feel of the palace at different hours, the cool stone at dawn, the warmth held in walls by afternoon, the gentle hush that comes at night when lamps turn corridors into rivers of gold. Paris remains close, but not always physically. His responsibilities pull him outward, to council rooms, to ramparts, to training yards, yet the connection between them persists in small moments, the way a steady flame persists beneath ash. A glance across a courtyard, a shared cup of water, a quiet conversation in a corridor where the lamps are spaced evenly, light and shadow repeating like a lullaby. Sometimes they meet in the gardens again, where leaves deepen into night green, and the fountains keep their steady sound. They sit on the same stone bench under the same tree, listening to the same quiet fall of petals. And even as years pass, the intimacy remains built from stillness rather than drama. Because drama cannot survive 10 years. Only rhythm can. Only patience. Only the human ability to make a home inside ongoing uncertainty. Seasons circle the city like a slow wheel. And spring arrives with green along the hills and small blossoms in palace courtyards. People plant and tend what they can inside the walls. Herbs grow in pots. Vines are trained along stone. The scent of new leaves lifts spirits briefly, like a warm hand on the back. Summer follows. Hot stone, bright sun, sweat and dust. The walls feel almost too warm to touch by midday. The sea shimmers. The distant ships become darker shapes against intense light. In summer, the siege feels like an endless afternoon, long and heavy, softened only by shade and water. Autumn comes, and with it the smell of smoke and dried leaves. The city stores grain and oil, preparing with careful quietness. The markets fill with preserved fruits, jars sealed with wax, cloth bundles tied tightly. People speak of winter as if winter is another enemy, and yet winter is not a threat. It is simply a season of quiet preparation. Then winter arrives. Cold seeps into stone, winds sharpen. Fires burn in every home, and the city smells of wood smoke and warm bread. The siege lines outside remain, watchfires on hills glowing through thin mist. Some nights snow falls lightly, making everything quieter, the world muffled like cloth over sound. And in winter, Troy becomes almost peaceful, strangely so, because the cold slows the outside world too. The war becomes quieter, as if both sides have to breathe more carefully. Then spring returns again, and again, and again. 10 years becomes a circle of repeating sensory experiences. The warmth of bread crust, the smell of smoke, the texture of wool cloaks, the coolness of water from a stone basin, the soft sound of sandals on rugs, i.e. the low crackle of fire. The war is there, always there, but often distant enough to feel like thunder far away, never breaking overhead, only reminding. Inside the walls, children still grow. That is one of the strangest truths. Children who were small when the ships first appeared become taller. Their voices deepen. Their laughter changes shape. They learn games that involve walls and watchtowers, pretending to be guards, pretending to be heroes, as if turning fear into play makes it manageable. Mothers still braid hair. Fathers still mend nets. Old men still sit in shade and tell stories that begin with "before the ships," as if before the ships is now a separate era of time. Even lovers still find corners of quiet, shadowed corridors, stair landings warmed by sun, balconies where the breeze carries the sea's slow breath. Human tenderness persists because it is one of the only things that makes endurance possible. At night, Helen sometimes lies awake listening, not to battle, to the city's steady sleeping sounds, a distant door settling, a guard's footsteps on stone, a dog barking once and falling quiet, the low murmur of wind at the shutters, and beyond all of it, faint, so faint it is almost imagined, the sound of drums from the hills. Thump, thump, thump. A heartbeat outside the walls. On such nights, Paris will sometimes join her, not with declarations, but with presence. He sits near her, and they share a silence that has grown familiar over years. The silence is not empty. It is full of everything they have already lived through. The early balcony ember glow, the first garden walk, the elder hall's quiet warnings, the acceptance that love and fate have braided themselves together. Helen's thoughts grow softer in that shared quiet. Inhale, slow. Exhale, slower. And the years pass like that, one breath at a time. If 10 years can be made soothing, it is because repetition can become a lullaby. Morning after morning, evening after evening, torchlight after torchlight, footsteps in corridors, bread on tables, lamps glowing, watchfires answering watchfires. A long siege becomes the background hum of life, and Troy, still standing, still beautiful, becomes a lesson in resilience. Not heroic speeches, not dramatic moments, but the simple daily act of continuing. It is a quiet endurance where Troy keeps breathing. How warmth and nostalgia gather around small human rituals, and how the war remains like a shadow at the edge of the firelight. Steady, quiet, and blended into the night. By the 8th year, Troy has learned a kind of quiet mastery. Not the mastery of winning, not the mastery of controlling fate, only the mastery of continuing. The mastery of waking up, lighting lamps, baking bread, repairing stone, speaking softly, and finding warmth, even when the horizon never fully clears. There are mornings when the air feels almost normal. The sun rises over the eastern hills and spills pale gold across rooftops. The city's stone catches the light and glows gently, as if Troy is trying to remember what it felt like before the ships became a constant thought. In courtyards, water is poured into basins. In kitchens, grain is ground and mixed with warm water, hands kneading dough in steady circles. Press, fold, turn, press. The rhythm is soothing. It is the same rhythm from one day to the next. And repetition becomes comfort. Repetition becomes proof that the city is still alive. Outside the walls, watchfires still sit on the hills. At night, their small flames appear like distant stars that have dropped to earth. Inside Troy, torches answer them, warm points of light along the ramparts, steady and disciplined. 2 constellations facing each other across dark land, not with shouting, but with stubborn presence. Sometimes Helen stands on a balcony and watches those distant fires. Not with fear exactly, with a kind of melancholy curiosity, because the watchfires are both threat and reminder. They remind her that time is passing. They remind her that people outside are enduring too, living their own routines, their own long waiting. They remind her that the story has become larger than any single person's intentions, and yet the city beneath her remains quietly human. A man still sweeps a doorway at dawn, making careful arcs with a bundled broom. A woman still shakes a cloth out a window, the fabric snapping softly in the morning air. A child still runs down a stone stairway too fast, laughing, then slows when a parent calls their name. Life continues in small sounds, tap of sandals, clink of clay cups, murmur of voices in markets, the soft hiss of oil poured into lamps. In the palace, Helen's days are made of the same gentle details. The corridors have become familiar as a second skin. She knows which stones are warmer in afternoon sun, which alcoves hold deeper shade, which doorways catch the breeze from the sea. She knows the scent of the palace at different hours: morning cedar, midday dust warmed by light, evening oil and smoke. She has learned the palace's quiet language, the way servants move like shadows, efficient and respectful, the way elders speak with measured pauses, always leaving space for consequences to sit in the room, the way Paris walks when the news is heavier than usual, shoulders set, jaw controlled, steps steady. Paris has changed over these years, not into a hardened statue, not into a loud hero, but into someone shaped by long responsibility. His gentleness remains, but it has grown more careful. His smiles come less often, yet when they come they feel more meaningful, like warm light after clouds. When Helen and Paris are together, their closeness is still built on small rituals: a quiet meal taken near a hearth, a shared cup of water on a balcony, a slow walk through a garden where fountains still whisper steadily. And their love has become less like a spark and more like embers, steady heat beneath ash, lasting because it doesn't need to blaze. On some evenings, when the palace is especially quiet, they sit in the same firelit chamber where they once spoke of choices that cannot be undone. The hearth glows orange, and the room becomes a pocket of warmth inside the wider coldness of waiting. Helen will sometimes reach for a scroll, not necessarily to read deeply, but to let her fingers touch the tied ribbon, to feel the texture of parchment. The act is soothing, like touching the spine of a familiar book. Paris might sit with his hands extended toward the fire, absorbing warmth into his palms. He watches the flame without staring, letting it calm the muscles in his face. And they speak in small sentences, not to solve the war, not to rewrite fate, only to remain human within it. "How was the water today?" Helen might ask. "Cold," Paris answers softly. "Clear." "Did the garden bloom?" "A little." "Do the children still play near the eastern wall?" "Yes," he says, and his voice warms slightly. "They've invented new games. They pretend the watchfires are stars they can steal." Helen smiles faintly at that. Bittersweet, tender. Because even now, innocence tries to turn fear into something manageable. Outside these firelit rooms, the city continues to breathe through seasons. In spring, the air smells of damp soil and new leaves. Small blossoms appear in palace courtyards, pale petals unfolding cautiously, as if the earth itself has learned not to rush. Helen sometimes pauses beside a flower and watches it, letting its quiet persistence soothe her. In summer, the heat presses down. And the city's stone radiates warmth. People seek shade beneath awnings and trees. Water becomes precious in a different way. Coolness held in clay jars, shared carefully. At night, people sleep on rooftops when they can, letting the sea breeze wash over them like a lullaby. In autumn, the light turns softer, and the markets fill with stored goods: grain, oil, dried fruits wrapped in cloth. The scent of smoke grows stronger as fires return. People speak a little more quietly, as if autumn always invites reflection. In winter, the world becomes hushed, and snow sometimes dusts the city's edges. This siege feels farther away in winter, muffled by cold and mist. Fires become the centre of each home, and storytelling returns as a warm ritual. People gathered close, listening to voices and pretending for an hour that the world is only the room. Where in those winter evenings, Troy feels almost cozy. It is a strange comfort built from necessity, a kind of by-the-fire warmth that holds melancholy the way a cloak holds heat. Helen notices that the city's grandness has become quieter over time. The temples still stand, but the ceremonies are smaller, more inward. The palace still glows with lamplight, but fewer corridors are used, fewer halls filled. Beauty remains, but it has become more intimate, less public, like a song hummed softly rather than sung loudly. The elders still meet, still speak in careful sentences, still weigh decisions. The guards still watch. The walls are still repaired. The harbour remains cautious, and the sea remains watchful. And through all of it, ordinary life continues like a thread that refuses to break. A baker still dusts flour from his hands and taps the bottom of loaves to hear if they're done. A potter still shapes clay on a wheel, fingers steady, water smoothing the surface in slow circles. A weaver still threads wool through a loom, the shuttle passing back and forth in rhythmic motion. Back, forth, back, forth. The rhythm is hypnotic. It makes you understand why humans survive long sieges. Not through constant alertness, but through the comfort of patterns. One late evening, Helen walks alone through a quiet corridor and pauses at an open window. The night air enters cool and clean. She listens. She can hear the city's sleep sounds, soft, distant, layered. A faint cough, a door settling, a dog shifting, the whisper of wind against shutters, and beyond it all, the sea's steady breathing. She places her hand on the stone sill and feels that the stone is cold now, but solid. It has held Troy for many seasons. It will keep holding for now. Paris approaches quietly behind her, and she senses him before she turns. He stops beside her, not touching, just present. They stand together at the window for a long moment. Helen speaks softly, her voice like a page turned slowly. "Sometimes I forget what it was like before this," she admits. Paris's response is gentle. "I remember," he says, "but I also can't return to it in my mind the way I used to." Helen nods. That is the strangest part of long waiting. The way it becomes normal, the way it reshapes memory until the old world feels like a story you once heard rather than a life you lived. A silence settles between them, not empty, but heavy with shared endurance. Finally, whereas Paris says, "The city is tired," Helen's eyes soften. "And still," she answers, "it keeps breathing." Paris looks out into the night, toward where watchfires might glow beyond walls. "Yes," he says, "it does." The words feel like a quiet prayer, not for victory, for continuation, for dignity, for the ability to remain gentle even when the world tries to harden you. Helen rests her head lightly against the cool stone beside the window. The coolness is grounding. She closes her eyes for a moment and lets her breathing slow. Inhale, slow. Exhale, slower. She imagines Troy as a living thing, stone bones, lamplight heartbeat, sea breeze breath, enduring not because it is invincible, but because it is human. And in that thought there is comfort, because endurance does not require perfection, it requires presence, one day at a time. One quiet ritual at a time, one ember of warmth held carefully through the dark. And now the world moves toward a deeper stillness, a night where everything feels unusually quiet, where the city's breath slows, and where acceptance begins to gather like dusk, soft, inevitable, and strangely peaceful. There are nights when a city becomes so quiet it feels like it is listening to itself. Not the ordinary quiet of late hours, when doors close, lamps dim, and people sink into sleep, but a deeper stillness, as if the air has decided to hold its breath. On such nights, even familiar sounds seem softer. The sea's distant hush, the wind's gentle touch on shutters, the far-off footstep of a guard turning slowly at the wall. Troy enters one of those nights. The sky is clear and dark, and the stars look unusually steady, pinpoints of light that do not flicker. as though they too are waiting. In the courtyards, lamplight pools on stone with a calm golden glow. Shadows gather in corners like velvet, smooth and unthreatening. The scent of smoke from hearths lingers faintly in the air, warm and comforting, mixing with salt that drifts from the sea, while Helen stands near an open window in an upper corridor of the palace, wrapped in a cloak that feels heavier at night. The fabric holds warmth close to her shoulders, yet she can still feel the coolness of the air brushing her face. She's not restless in the frantic way of fear. She's restful in the melancholy way of knowing. A knowing that has arrived slowly over years. A knowing that does not shout. It simply sits beside you, like a book placed quietly on a table. Below her window, the palace courtyard is almost empty. A single lamp burns near a column, its flame small and steady. The light does not try to defeat the darkness, it only softens it, making the night feel safe rather than empty. Helen listens. There is the faint trickle of a fountain somewhere, the water continuing its patient repetition. Blip, blip, blip. The rhythm is soothing. The rhythm feels like time itself moving, not hurried, not delayed, simply moving. From the wall far away, a signal call drifts faintly, not alarmed, just routine. Guards marking time, reminding one another they are awake. Then silence returns. Helen's breath slows. Inhale, slow. Exhale, slower. She has learned the shape of these nights. She has learned that sometimes the quiet is not an absence of danger. It is the presence of something inevitable approaching, not with violence but with certainty. The palace doors open softly behind her. Paris enters without sound that would startle. His steps are careful, as if he respects the quiet like a sacred thing. He pauses a moment in the corridor, letting the lamplight catch his face. He looks tired in the gentle way of long endurance, tired but composed. Shoulders held steady, eyes soft rather than sharp. He comes to stand beside Helen at the window, not touching her at first, just sharing the view, the night air, the stillness. For a long moment, neither speaks. Outside, the city rests inside its walls like a sleeping animal, breathing slowly, protected by stone, warmed by thousands of small fires. Helen's voice arrives first, barely above a whisper. It feels too calm, she says. Paris does not contradict her. Yes, he answers softly. I feel it too. Helen turns her head slightly to look at him. What is it, she asks, and the question is not only about strategy or rumour. It is about the atmosphere, the pressure in the air, the way silence can become meaningful. Paris watches the courtyard lamp for a moment, then speaks carefully. Sometimes, he says, before something changes, the world becomes very quiet, as if it wants to remember itself the way it was. Helen's chest tightens gently, not panic, just a soft ache. Remember itself, she repeats, tasting the phrase. Paris nods once. Yes. They stand together in the window's cool draught, wrapped in lamplight and shadow. The palace around them is hushed, but it is not empty. Somewhere down a corridor, a servant moves quietly, carrying a folded cloth or a small bowl of water. Somewhere farther away, a hearth settles with a faint crackle as a coal collapses into ash. Life continues, even in this stillness. That is what makes it poignant. Helen's gaze drifts outward, toward the direction of the harbour. She cannot see the sea from here, not directly. Only rooftops and walls and a strip of sky beyond. Yet in her mind, the sea is present. Dark water under stars, ships like silent shapes, watchfires on hills, those distant watchfires. They have been there so long they almost feel like part of the landscape. Yet tonight Helen senses them differently, as if the lights are closer, brighter, more awake. Not because they moved, because her awareness has shifted. She exhales slowly and says, "I keep thinking about the first night." Paris turns his head slightly, listening. "The balcony," she adds. "The ember glow. The way the city looked like it was made of gold." Paris's eyes soften, and for a moment the weariness in him becomes tender nostalgia. "I remember," he says. "It felt like the city was holding a song." Helen's lips lift in a faint, sad smile. "And now," she whispers, "it feels like the song is ending." Paris's hand moves, slow and careful, and this time he rests it lightly over Helen's cloak near her shoulder, not gripping, not pulling, only offering warmth. The contact is gentle, a reminder that even when the world shifts, human closeness remains possible. "It isn't ending," he says quietly. "It is changing." Helen closes her eyes for a moment, feeling the warmth of his hand through the fabric. Inhale, slow, exhale, slower, changing. That is the word that makes acceptance possible. Not destruction, not catastrophe, change. Because change is part of the human story, part of the way seasons turn, part of how cities, like people, have chapters they cannot avoid. They remain at the window, and the quiet continues to deepen. In the courtyard below, the single lamp burns steadily. Helen watches the flame, how it leans slightly, then straightens, how it does not panic in wind, how it simply continues. The flame becomes a small teacher, a reminder that calmness is not the same as ignorance. Calmness can be discipline. Calmness can be dignity. Paris speaks again, voice low. "The elders met tonight," he says. Helen's eyes open slowly. "And?" she asks. "They said the same thing they have said for years," Paris answers, and there is a faint weariness in his tone. "Be ready. Repair what can be repaired. Watch the sea. Keep the people steady." Helen nods. "And what did you hear?" she asks, because she knows Paris always hears more than official words. He hears the undertones. Paris pauses. "I heard," he begins, then stops, as if searching for the least harsh way to speak. "I heard that messengers may arrive soon." Helen's breath catches slightly, then smooths again. Messengers. Words on scrolls. Demands written in ink. The kind of thing that makes silence feel fragile. "And when they arrive?" Helen asks softly. Paris's hand stays warm on her shoulder. "When they arrive," he says, "we will still speak quietly. We will still act with dignity. We will not let loudness take over our minds." Helen turns her face slightly toward him. "Do you believe that?" she asks. Paris looks at her, and his gaze is steady. "I have to," he says. "It's the only way to survive 10 years without becoming stone." Helen understands. Survival is not only physical, it is moral, emotional. The survival of softness, the survival of warmth, the survival of love that does not need to be loud to be real. They stand together longer, letting the night wrap around them. The palace seems to hum with stillness. Quiet corridors, warm lamps, cool stone. It feels like a library after midnight, a place where even thoughts whisper. Helen notices how peaceful this quiet is, even though it carries sadness. There is a strange comfort in the stillness, the way a final sunset can be beautiful, even when you know night is coming. Not because night is bad, but because endings are part of cycles. She whispers, almost to herself, "Maybe this is what acceptance feels like." Paris does not answer immediately. He lets the words settle, and the silence that follows is gentle rather than heavy. Then he says, acceptance is not giving up. It is letting the story be true. Helen breathes in. Inhale, slow. She breathes out. Exhale, slower, letting the story be true. That is the heart of this night. Not panic, not denial. A soft, a steady willingness to face what comes without losing the tenderness they have kept alive for so long. Down below, the courtyard lamp flickers slightly, then steadies again. A breeze passes through, cool and clean, and the flame's resilience feels symbolic, small light persisting in darkness. Helen rests her hand over Paris's on her shoulder, not squeezing, just acknowledging. Together they remain at the window, watching the night, listening to the city's slow breathing. And as the hour deepens, the stillness becomes almost soothing, like the kind of quiet that arrives when you're finally ready to sleep. A quiet that does not demand answers. A quiet that says, you have done enough for today. A quiet that allows you to rest, even inside an unfinished story. And so, we drift toward what remains after the hush, into memory, into love beyond ruin, into the way humans carry beauty forward even when cities fall. Not with bitterness, but with peaceful acceptance, like closing a book gently and turning out the lamp. In every long story there comes a point where the telling must soften, not because the truth is too sharp to face, but because the soul can only hold so much weight at once. And so, as Troy moves toward its final turning, we step away from the loud versions of this myth, the versions that are all shouting and spectacle, and we sit instead in the quiet place where memory forms. Because the deepest part of the Trojan War was never only about battles, it was about the price of beauty, the weight of impossible love, and the human need to accept that some losses are woven into the fabric of being alive. On the last nights, Troy still looks like Troy. That is one of the most tender truths. The walls still stand in moonlight, tall and pale, holding the city as they always have. The temples still lift their columns toward the stars. The harbour still breathes with the sea's slow rhythm. Lamps still glow in courtyards, small and steady, like the city has decided to keep lighting its own warmth, no matter what waits beyond the horizon. Inside the palace, the firelit rooms remain. A hearth still crackles gently. A cup still catches light. A folded cloth still rests on a table, neat and ordinary. And these ordinary details matter, because they are what people carry with them when the larger shape of life changes. Helen moves through corridors that have become as familiar as her own breath. She touches the stone walls sometimes, feeling their cool steadiness. She passes a shelf of scrolls and tablets and thinks of how easily history becomes a story told by someone else. She does not want to be a symbol. She wants to be a person, and yet she understands softly now, Scaean, that the world always makes symbols out of what it cannot hold in full complexity. Paris walks beside her when he can. He does not try to rescue the story from fate, because he has learned what 10 years teaches. You cannot outmuscle what is inevitable. You can only decide what kind of human you will be inside it. So he remains gentle. He remains steady. He keeps his voice low. He keeps lighting lamps. He keeps listening. On one final evening, one that feels quieter than all the others, Helen and Paris return to the balcony where it began. The same stone rail, the same direction of sea wind, the same horizon that once shimmered gold and now rests in deep blue-black. Below them, Troy is almost asleep. Not empty, not defeated, simply resting. The city's breath is slow. The lamps glow softly, like a constellation laid carefully on the ground. Paris stands close enough that his warmth reaches her, but he does not crowd her. Helen's cloak moves slightly in the breeze. The air smells of salt and faint smoke and something floral from a courtyard garden. They do not speak at first. Words feel too small. And in this silence, Helen realizes something that surprises her. She is not only sad, she is also grateful. Grateful for the quiet nights, for the ember glow, for the slow recognition that became love, for the fact that even in a story that ends with loss, there can still be moments of tenderness that are real and lasting. Paris's voice arrives softly, careful not to disturb the night. "If we could have had any life," he says, "what would you have chosen?" Helen thinks, not long, because the answer's been living in her for years. "I would have chosen this," she whispers. War, but without the shadow. Paris exhales slowly, and the sound is almost like a smile and a sigh together. "Yes," he says, "me too." They stand together, letting that truth settle. Love can be perfect in itself, and still arrive in imperfect circumstances. Helen's gaze drifts toward the city lights below. "People will remember Troy," she says. Paris nods. "They will." "And they will remember us," she adds, quieter. "They will," he repeats, and there is tenderness in the certainty. Helen turns her face slightly toward him. "But they won't remember the real things," she says. "They won't remember the quiet." Paris's hand lifts and rests lightly over hers on the stone rail, warm skin against cool stone. "Then we will," he says. Helen closes her eyes for a moment. Inhale, slow. Exhale, slower. The calm in her breath feels like the calm the underworld offered Persephone in another story. Rest as sacred, silence as shelter. Tonight the balcony becomes that kind of shelter, a quiet place where the mind can stop wrestling and simply accept. Because acceptance is not the same as approval. Acceptance is the recognition that fighting reality only sharpens pain. Acceptance is the way you loosen your grip and let the night hold you. In the days that follow, the story of Troy shifts, like seasons shifting, like a candle flame leaning and then straightening again. The city changes shape. People move differently. Rooms feel emptier. The air feels heavier. But we do not linger in loud scenes. We remain with the tender human truth. Even as structures change, love does not vanish. Love becomes memory. Love becomes meaning. Love becomes the quiet ember carried forward. Helen, in the softer versions of the myth, is sometimes portrayed as regret itself. But in this telling, she's something else. She's the human heart trying to live inside forces larger than it and still remain human. She remembers Troy not only as a city that fell, but as a city that glowed, a city of warm stone at sunset, a city of fountains whispering in gardens, a city where lamps lined corridors like steady stars, a city where love happened quietly, honestly, without performance. Paris remains in memory, not as a reckless thief of beauty, but as a young man who recognized something true and could not pretend it wasn't. And perhaps that is the bittersweet core. Sometimes the truest things arrive without asking whether the timing is kind. Time moves on, stories move on, and yet, what remains, what always remains, is the quiet emotional residue, the feeling the story leaves in the body. Nostalgic warmth, bittersweet love, quiet grandeur, peaceful acceptance. Tonight as you listen, you are not being asked to mourn. You're being invited to rest, to understand that human life includes love that cannot be kept, cities that cannot be saved, and moments that are still worth having. Because the worth of a moment is not measured by how long it lasts. It is measured by how real it is while it exists. So let Troy become what all myths become in the end. Not a lesson that scolds you, but a mirror that comforts you. A reminder that you can love deeply and still survive. A reminder that you can lose something and still carry its warmth. A reminder that endings are not only endings, they are also the way the mind finally loosens into sleep. If you have found sanctuary in this story, take a gentle moment to like or subscribe, helping the firelight reach others before we drift into the final silence. Now, if your thoughts are still spinning, bring them back to something simple. Imagine the balcony, cool stone beneath your hands, warm ember light behind you, a gentle sea breeze touching your face, the city below glowing softly. Now imagine the lights dimming one by one, not with fear, but with softness. One lamp goes out, then another. The city quiets, your body quiets, your breathing slows. Inhale, slow. Exhale, slower. And just like Troy at night, you don't have to solve anything right now. You don't have to rewrite fate. You only have to rest. Let the last lamp in your mind go quiet. Good night.